May 29, 1915. Queen's Post, Gallipoli Peninsula. An Australian Lance Corporal peers through a makeshift device, 2 mirrors, a wooden frame, and signal wire twisted around a Lee-Enfield rifle. The Turkish trenches sit less than 10 meters away. Close enough to hear enemy soldiers talking. Close enough to throw a cricket ball into their sandbags. He looks down through the lower mirror. Aligns the reflection. Pulls the wire. The rifle cracks. Across no man's land, a Turkish sniper slumps forward. The Lance Corporal never raised his head above the parapet. Never exposed himself to the dozens of enemy marksmen waiting for exactly that mistake. His invention, built from a biscuit tin, broken glass, and scrap wood, just saved his life. Within weeks, every dangerous position on the ANZAC line would have won. Within months, the British would be copying the design. But the man who invented it? A builder's foreman from Victoria who'd been at Gallipoli less than 3 weeks. This is the story of the weapon that turned the hunted into hunters. The device that let Australians fight back against the deadliest snipers in the Ottoman army. The Periscope rifle. When Australian and New Zealand forces stormed ashore at what would become ANZAC Cove on April 25, 1915, they expected a brief, decisive campaign. The plan seemed straightforward: land on the Gallipoli Peninsula, push inland, knock out the Turkish defences, and open the Dardanelles Straits to Allied shipping. Constantinople would fall. The Ottoman Empire would collapse. The war would be shortened by years. Reality proved catastrophically different. The Anzacs landed on the wrong beach, a narrow strip of sand overlooked by steep, scrub-covered ridges. Instead of open ground, they faced cliffs. Instead of scattered defenders, they encountered well-prepared Turkish positions with overlapping fields of fire. By nightfall of the first day, over 2,000 Australians were casualties. The survivors were pinned down in hastily dug trenches barely 300 meters from the beach. What followed wasn't a campaign of maneuver. It was a siege. The geography of ANZAC Cove created a battlefield unlike anything the Australians had trained for. The Turkish defenders held the high ground across virtually every approach. Deep gullies channeled movement into kill zones. The ridgelines were so close that grenades could be thrown between enemy positions. At places like Queen's Post, Courtney's Post, and Steele's Post, the opposing trenches were separated by as little as 8 to 15 meters. This proximity transformed sniping from a specialized skill into industrial-scale killing. Turkish marksmen enjoyed every advantage. They held elevated positions with clear lines of sight down into the Australian trenches. They could observe every movement, anticipate every patrol, and dominate every approach with precision rifle fire. The Ottoman Fifth Army had recruited some of the finest shots in the empire, mountain shepherds who'd grown up hunting game in the Anatolian highlands, men who could consistently hit targets at 300 yards with iron-sighted rifles. The statistics tell the story of this sniper supremacy. During May 1915 alone, Australian casualties at Queen's Post averaged 30 to 40 men per day, with roughly 1/3 of those killed or wounded by sniper fire. Simply moving supplies forward required crawling through communication trenches. Fetching water became a potentially fatal task. Looking over the parapet for more than 2 seconds was considered suicidal. Major General William Bridges, commanding officer of the 1st Australian Division, learned this lesson the hardest way. On May 15, while observing Turkish positions from a supposedly safe vantage point at Monash Valley, he was shot by a sniper. The bullet severed his femoral artery. Bridges died 3 days later aboard a hospital ship, the highest-ranking Australian officer killed during the Gallipoli campaign. His death sent shockwaves through the ANZAC command. If a division commander wasn't safe, no one was. The British issue equipment proved inadequate for this nightmare of close-quarters trench warfare. The standard short magazine Lee-Enfield Mk3 rifle, the SMLE, was a superb weapon for open warfare. It was accurate, reliable, and capable of rapid fire. But at Gallipoli, its very effectiveness became a death sentence. To use the Lee-Enfield properly, a soldier had to raise his head above the parapet, shoulder the weapon, aim through the sights, and squeeze the trigger while completely exposed. Turkish snipers learned to wait. Patient. Silent. They'd watch a section of trench through German-made rifle scopes. The moment an Australian head appeared, they'd fire. Often, the victim never even heard the shot. Standard trench periscopes helped. Soldiers could observe enemy positions without exposure, but observation wasn't enough. The ANZACs needed a way to shoot back. They needed a weapon that could deliver accurate fire while the shooter remained below ground level. They needed someone ingenious enough to build what the British War Office hadn't imagined. They needed William Beech. The tactical mathematics of Quinn's post were brutally simple. Stand up, die. Stay down, surrender the initiative to an enemy who controlled every sight line. The ANZACs tried every conventional solution. Night raids provided temporary relief, but cost heavily in casualties and never lasted past dawn. Counter-sniping from protected positions proved nearly impossible. Turkish marksmen could fire from dozens of concealed loopholes and immediately retreat into covered positions. Even Australia's most skilled marksman, Trooper Billy Singh of the 5th Light Horse, who would eventually record over 150 confirmed kills, needed elaborate sniper posts with multiple layers of camouflage to survive at Gallipoli. For ordinary infantrymen, the situation approached hopelessness. Artillery support couldn't solve the problem. The Australian guns were positioned on the beach below, their elevation angles limited by the terrain. Shelling Turkish trenches that sat mere meters from friendly positions risked killing as many ANZACs as Ottomans. Naval gunfire was even less precise. And the Turks had learned to dig deep. Their trenches featured overhead cover, dugouts, and firing positions that could weather bombardment and return to action within minutes. The British SMLE rifle, for all its virtues, demanded exposure. Its 10-round magazine capacity was excellent. Its .303 British cartridge was effective beyond 600 yards. Its bolt-action design allowed a trained rifleman to fire 15 aimed shots per minute. But none of those advantages mattered if the shooter was dead before he could fire the second round. Some soldiers tried improvised solutions. They'd hold rifles overhead and fire blind, hoping volume would substitute for accuracy. This wasted ammunition, already in short supply, while achieving virtually nothing. The rounds went wild, endangering fellow soldiers in adjacent positions more often than threatening the enemy. Even worse, the muzzle flash and noise revealed the position without delivering effective fire. Others attempted to use trench mirrors to align shots. They'd prop a rifle on the parapet, position a mirror to see roughly where it pointed, and pull the trigger with a stick. The results were dismal. Without proper sight alignment, the bullets struck trench walls, sandbags, or empty air. The Turkish soldiers quickly learned to ignore this ineffective fire. The ANZACs studied captured Turkish positions after successful raids and found their opponents faced no such limitations. The Ottomans held the high ground. They could shoot down into Australian trenches from protected positions. They had purpose-built sniper loopholes, narrow firing slits in reinforced positions that provided protection while allowing accurate aimed fire. The geographical advantage magnified their marksmanship into overwhelming superiority. At Quinn's Post specifically, the situation bordered on unbearable. The position projected forward into Turkish lines, creating a salient where enemies could deliver enfilade fire from 3 directions. The post was only 15 meters from the nearest Ottoman trench, close enough that soldiers could hear enemy conversations. Turkish grenade throwers could literally drop bombs into the Australian positions. And snipers dominated every inch of ground. The casualty reports from late April and early May 1915 painted a grim picture. The 2nd Battalion recorded that approximately 60% of their casualties in the first 3 weeks came from small arms fire, with sniping accounting for roughly half of that. Men were being killed while they slept when they shifted position at night. Some died from ricochets inside their own trenches. Others were shot while trying to retrieve wounded comrades from no man's land. Unit commanders filed desperate reports requesting solutions. Battalion war diaries recorded the growing frustration. One 1st Division report from early May stated, "Sniping continues unabated. Men cannot move in daylight. Water-carrying parties suffer heavily. Ammunition expenditure drops not because men lack targets, but because they cannot safely engage them. What the Australians needed wasn't better rifles, more ammunition, or improved tactics. They needed an entirely different approach to the fundamental problem of trench warfare. They needed a way to aim and fire a standard-issue Lee-Enfield rifle while remaining completely protected below ground level. The solution required only ingenuity, scrap materials, and someone willing to ignore what conventional military thinking said was impossible. William Charles Bullock Beech was born in 1875 in Victoria, Australia. By 1915, he was 40 years old, considerably older than most men storming ashore at Gallipoli. In civilian life, Beech worked as a builder's foreman, supervising construction projects and solving the practical problems that arise when theory meets reality. He understood load-bearing structures, angles, and how to improvise solutions with available materials. When war broke out in August 1914, Beech enlisted in the 2nd Battalion, Australian Imperial Force. His age and professional experience earned him quick promotion to Lance Corporal. He deployed with his unit as part of the first wave of the ANZAC landing on April 25, 1915. Beech survived the initial assault. As the ANZACs dug in during those first desperate days, he was assigned to Quinn's Post, arguably the most dangerous 50 square meters on the entire Gallipoli Peninsula. The position was crucial for maintaining the Australian defensive line, but holding it required accepting casualties that would have been considered unsustainable anywhere else. Within a week, Beech watched men die for the simple act of looking at the enemy. The sniper threat was so severe that entire sections went to ground during daylight, unable to conduct even basic maintenance on their positions. The Turks, by contrast, moved with relative freedom in their elevated trenches, confident that ANZAC riflemen couldn't effectively return fire without exposing themselves. The official story, documented in the 2nd Battalion War Diary, states that Beech developed his Periscope rifle design in mid-May 1915, approximately 3 weeks after the landing. But the practical builder's foreman had almost certainly been thinking about the problem much longer. He'd observed how standard trench periscopes allowed safe observation. He understood that mirrors could redirect sight lines. And he knew that the Lee-Enfield rifle, while mechanically excellent, required only a simple pull on the trigger to fire. What if those 3 elements could be combined? Beech's first prototype was startlingly crude. He found a wooden biscuit box, the kind used to ship hardtack rations. He scavenged a broken trench periscope and removed its 2 small mirrors. Using pieces of scrap lumber and his builder's skills, he constructed a wooden frame that would hold a Lee-Enfield rifle elevated above the parapet while keeping the butt and trigger mechanism at chest height for a standing soldier below ground level. The critical innovation was the sight alignment. Beech mounted one mirror at the top of the frame, angled at 45 degrees to look directly along the rifle's iron sights. The second mirror was positioned at the bottom, also at 45 degrees, reflecting the image from the upper mirror into the eye of the shooter. The optical principle was identical to a trench periscope, but adapted specifically for weapon sighting. For the firing mechanism, Beech used signal wire, the thin but strong copper wire used for field telephone connections. He fashioned a loop around the rifle's trigger and ran the wire down to a simple pull cord at waist level. The entire contraption looked like something cobbled together by a desperate man with no proper tools. Which is exactly what it was. Beech tested his first periscope rifle on May 19, 1915. According to witnesses, he set the device up, peered into the lower mirror, made minor adjustments to align the reflection with the rifle sights, and then pulled the trigger cord. The Lee-Enfield cracked. The bullet struck within inches of where Beech had aimed. More importantly, Beech never raised his head above the sandbags. He just invented a weapon that would save hundreds of Australian lives. Initial reaction from Beech's fellow soldiers ranged from skepticism to desperate hope. Some thought the contraption looked too fragile to survive sustained use. Others worried that its effectiveness wouldn't justify the time and materials required to build copies. But at Quinn's Post, where men were dying daily from sniper fire, skepticism was a luxury no one could afford. Beech constructed several more Periscope rifles in the following days. He refined the design with each iteration, strengthening the wooden frame, improving the mirror mounts, and perfecting the trigger cord mechanism. Soldiers at Quinn's Post began using them almost immediately, targeting Turkish snipers and bomb throwers who had previously operated with near impunity. Within a week, demand exceeded Beech's ability to personally construct the devices. Word spread to adjacent units. Soldiers began scavenging materials, mirrors from damaged periscopes, wood from ammunition boxes, wire from everywhere. By early June, Periscope rifles appeared throughout the most dangerous sections of the ANZAC line. The command structure took notice. On June 3, 1915, Major General Alexander Godley, commanding the New Zealand and Australian Division, officially authorized production of Beech's design. A workshop was established on the beach at ANZAC Cove, where carpenters and engineers mass-produced standardized versions of the Periscope rifle using proper woodworking tools and better materials than Beech's original scrap-built prototypes. William Beech was promoted to sergeant. His invention was recognized in official reports, and his name would forever be associated with one of the most successful improvised weapons of the First World War. Technical breakdown. The Beech Periscope rifle, in its refined production form, was elegantly simple, a testament to functional design over aesthetic refinement. The core component remained the standard SMLE No. 1 Mk3 rifle. This weapon measured 44.5 inches overall, weighed 8 pounds 10 ounces, and fired the .303 British cartridge from a 10-round detachable magazine. The Lee-Enfield's robust bolt-action design and combat-proven reliability made it ideal for the Periscope rifle's requirements. It could withstand the awkward mounting angles and continued to function even when subjected to dust, moisture, and rough handling. The wooden mounting frame extended approximately 30 inches above and below the rifle's center line. The total height of the assembled Periscope rifle reached roughly 6 feet from ground level to the top mirror, allowing the rifle's muzzle to clear typical trench parapets while keeping the firing mechanism at chest level for a standing operator. The frame was constructed from Australian boxwood, strong, lightweight, and readily available from ammunition and ration crates. The frame consisted of 2 vertical supporting members connected by cross braces. These verticals flanked the rifle, holding it securely with a combination of leather straps, metal clamps, and padded wooden blocks. The design had to balance rigidity, to prevent the rifle from shifting when fired, against the need to quickly remove the weapon for cleaning and reloading. Most production models used quick-release leather straps that could be unfastened and refastened in under 20 seconds. The mirror arrangement was the system's optical heart. The upper mirror, typically measuring 2 inches by 3 inches, was mounted at a precise 45-degree angle directly in line with the rifle's rear sight. This position allowed the mirror to reflect the exact sight picture that a conventionally shouldered rifle would provide. The mirror was protected by a wooden housing with an adjustable viewing slot. This reduced glare and prevented light reflections from revealing the position to enemy observers. The lower mirror, identical in size to the upper, was positioned at eye level for a soldier standing in the trench. It too was mounted at 45 degrees, reflecting the image from the upper mirror into the shooter's line of sight. The result was an optical path that redirected the sight picture downward through 2 90-degree bends, allowing the operator to see exactly what the rifle was aimed at without exposing his head above ground level. Early Periscope rifles used fragments of broken trench Periscope mirrors. These were genuine glass with silver backing, far superior to polished metal reflectors. As production scaled up, the ANZAC Cove workshop obtained proper optical mirrors from stores. The quality improvement was immediately noticeable. Clearer sight pictures meant improved accuracy. The trigger mechanism employed signal wire, typically 18-gauge copper. A loop of wire was secured around the rifle's trigger, positioned carefully so that pulling on the wire would draw the trigger straight back along its natural arc of travel. The wire ran down through simple guide loops mounted on the frame's vertical supports, terminating in a wooden handle or loop at waist height. This wire pull system introduced the periscope rifle's primary limitation. Even with carefully adjusted wire tension, the act of pulling the cord introduced minute variations in aim. The rifle would shift slightly left or right, up or down, as the wire was drawn. Skilled operators learned to compensate, applying smooth, steady pressure rather than jerking the cord. But the inherent imprecision meant that periscope rifles were most effective at ranges under 100 yards, fortunately, exactly the ranges most common at Gallipoli. Reloading required lowering the entire assembly or removing the rifle from its frame. The standard SMLE magazine held 10 rounds, meaning an operator could fire 10 shots before needing to reload. In practice, most soldiers fired 3 to 5 aimed shots, then rotated the weapon out of position to refill the magazine. This kept the periscope rifle ready for sustained use rather than emptying the magazine and then facing a prolonged reloading period under fire. Weight of the complete assembly varied depending on materials, but typically reached 18 to 22 pounds, roughly double the weight of the rifle alone. This wasn't problematic since the periscope rifle remained stationary once emplaced. Many positions featured semi-permanent installations where the wooden frame was secured to trench timbers, creating dedicated firing positions that could be manned quickly when targets appeared. Effective range was conservatively rated at 100 yards, though skilled operators achieved hits beyond 150 yards. The optical system introduced no magnification, it simply redirected the standard sight picture, meaning accuracy depended entirely on the operator's skill with iron sights and his ability to compensate for the wire pull trigger. Against point targets like sniper loopholes or observation posts, the periscope rifle proved adequately accurate. Against area targets like trench lines or groups of soldiers, it was devastatingly effective. Production numbers aren't precisely documented, but estimates suggest several hundred periscope rifles were manufactured at ANZAC Cove between June and December 1915. Each was hand-built to a standard pattern, with variations to accommodate available materials and specific tactical requirements. Some featured reinforced frames for extended use at permanent positions. Others were lighter, portable versions that could be moved between firing points. The genius of Beech's design lay not in revolutionary technology but in clever application of existing principles. Mirrors had been used for observation for years. Wire pull triggers weren't new. Lee-Enfield rifles were standard issue. But combining these elements into a functional weapon system, one that solved a critical battlefield problem with materials at hand, that was innovation born of necessity. Now, if you're finding this interesting, consider subscribing. We are building something here for people who actually care about the details, the engineering, the history, the stories behind Australia's military innovations. It takes a second, costs nothing, and helps the channel grow. The periscope rifle's first significant combat test came at Queen's Post in late May 1915. Private Arthur Sullivan of the 2nd Battalion recorded in his diary, "New contraption arrived today. Rifle on a stick with mirrors. Looked balmy until Stevens used it to pot a Turkish bomber at 30 yards. The Turk never saw it coming. Stevens never raised his head. We want more of these." That entry captured the weapon's immediate tactical value. At positions where showing one's head meant near certain death, the periscope rifle allowed Australians to engage the enemy with relative safety. Turkish snipers, accustomed to watching for exposed targets, suddenly faced fire from apparently empty trenches. The psychological impact was immediate and significant. Ottoman soldiers who had grown confident in their sniper supremacy now had to assume every section of Australian trench might conceal a periscope rifle. They couldn't spot these weapons, no helmet appeared above the parapet, no face showed at a loophole. The weapons simply appeared, fired, and vanished. This uncertainty forced Turkish soldiers to adopt more cautious tactics, reducing their own effectiveness. By June 1915, periscope rifles were in constant use across the most exposed sections of the ANZAC line. Queen's Post, Courtney's Post, Steele's Post, and other forward positions all maintained multiple periscope rifles as standard equipment. War diaries from this period consistently note their effectiveness, particularly against enemy grenade throwers and snipers. Lieutenant Colonel George Bryant, commanding the 2nd Battalion, wrote in his June 15 report, "The Periscope rifles continue to prove their worth. Enemy sniping has noticeably decreased in sectors where these devices are actively employed. Our casualties from small arms fire have dropped by approximately 1/3 since their introduction. That casualty reduction, approximately 33%, represented dozens of lives saved each week across the ANZAC positions." While impossible to attribute entirely to the Periscope rifle, the correlation between their deployment and reduced sniper casualties was documented repeatedly in after-action reports. Sergeant William Beech himself used his invention effectively. On July 8, 1915, he employed a Periscope rifle to engage a Turkish observation post that had been directing artillery fire onto Australian positions. Beech fired 11 rounds over the course of 2 hours, methodically targeting the loopholes of the observation post. While he couldn't confirm kills, the Turkish artillery fire became noticeably less accurate afterward, suggesting the observers had either been hit or forced to evacuate their position. The weapon proved particularly valuable during the August offensive. As Australian forces launched attacks from ANZAC Cove toward the heights of Chinook Bear and Hill 971, Periscope rifles provided covering fire from the old defensive lines. They suppressed Turkish positions that would otherwise have enfiladed the advancing troops, all while the operators remained protected in their trenches. Private Robert Hughes, 1st Battalion, described using a Periscope rifle during the August fighting. "We had good targets, Turks moving in their trenches, thinking themselves safe. I fired maybe 20 rounds that day, proper aimed shots, not random potshots. Saw at least 3 men go down. The Periscope rifle let me do what a proper sniper does, but without needing special training or fancy equipment. Just patience and steady hands on the wire." Not every engagement proved successful. The Periscope rifle's limitations became apparent with experience. Beyond 150 yards, the wire pull trigger introduced too much variation for consistent accuracy against individual targets. The mirrors could fog in humid weather or become obscured by dust from nearby explosions. And the weapon was useless at night. The mirrors required sufficient light to provide a useful sight picture. Some soldiers learned to use the Periscope rifles in pairs. One man would operate the weapon while a second man, using a conventional trench periscope, acted as a spotter and directed fire onto targets. This team approach significantly improved effectiveness, allowing sustained fire on area targets and providing immediate feedback on shot placement. The Turks eventually developed countermeasures. They began targeting the distinctive silhouette of the Periscope rifle's wooden frame when it appeared above the parapet. Concentrated rifle fire would often splinter the frame or shatter the mirrors, forcing operators to withdraw the weapon for repairs. Some Turkish snipers specifically waited for Periscope rifles to appear, then delivered immediate suppressive fire to prevent their effective use. Despite these limitations, the Periscope rifle's combat record at Gallipoli was undeniably positive. It allowed the ANZACs to maintain effective rifle fire during daylight hours from positions where conventional firing would have been suicidal. It forced Turkish soldiers to adopt more cautious behavior, reducing their combat effectiveness. And it provided a tangible morale boost to Australian soldiers who had felt helpless against enemy snipers. Perhaps most tellingly, soldiers cared for their Periscope rifles with near-religious devotion. They named them Beech's Revenge, Turkish Surprise, the Widowmaker, and competed for access to the best examples. When units rotated out of frontline positions, they carefully noted the location of Periscope rifles in their handover briefings, ensuring replacements knew these valuable weapons were available. After the war, Charles Bean, Australia's official war historian, would write, "The Periscope rifle was not a weapon of great technical sophistication. But at Gallipoli, where the margins between survival and death measured in inches, it provided Australians with a means to strike back when conventional tactics had failed. In that context, it was invaluable." The Periscope rifle's influence extended beyond individual firefights. Its widespread adoption fundamentally altered tactical calculations at Gallipoli. Before the Periscope rifle, Turkish forces could move with relative freedom during daylight in their forward positions. They knew ANZAC soldiers had to expose themselves dangerously to deliver effective aimed fire. This freedom of movement allowed rapid reinforcement of threatened positions, efficient supply distribution, and coordinated small unit tactics. After Periscope rifles became common, that freedom evaporated. Turkish soldiers had to assume any movement might draw fire from an unseen weapon. They adopted more cautious behavior, staying lower in trenches, moving quickly between covered positions, and avoiding exposure even when no visible threat appeared. This behavioral change slowed their operational tempo and reduced their tactical flexibility. Ottoman war records captured after the war confirmed this impact. A captured report from the Turkish 19th Division, dated August 1915, noted, "The enemy has developed a method of firing from concealment that makes daylight movement hazardous. Our casualties from this invisible rifle continue to mount. Recommend increased overhead cover and restrictions on daylight exposure." The British took immediate notice of the Australian innovation. By July 1915, British units on the Hellas front were requesting plans for Periscope rifles. Within weeks, British workshops were producing their own versions, often with improved materials and more refined construction. The concept spread to the Western Front, where similar devices appeared in British and French trenches by autumn 1915. The Periscope rifle also influenced Australian military doctrine regarding field improvisation. The success of Beech's design, alongside other Gallipoli innovations like the drip rifle and jam tin bombs, demonstrated that soldiers facing immediate tactical problems could develop effective solutions faster than formal military procurement channels. This encouraged a culture of practical innovation that would characterize Australian forces throughout both world wars. From a strategic perspective, the Periscope rifle helped the ANZACs hold impossibly exposed positions like Quinn's Post for the entire 8-month campaign. These positions were crucial for maintaining the defensive perimeter at ANZAC Cove. Had they fallen, the entire ANZAC position might have collapsed, forcing a premature evacuation under fire. The Periscope rifle didn't win the Gallipoli campaign, nothing could have done that, but it helped prevent an early, catastrophic defeat. Production and service life. The makeshift workshop on the beach at ANZAC Cove operated from early June 1915 until the evacuation in December. Staffed by carpenters, engineers, and soldiers with relevant trade skills, the workshop produced Periscope rifles alongside other improvised equipment. Production was never standardized in the modern sense. Each weapon was handcrafted to a general pattern but varied in details depending on available materials and the specific requirements of the unit requesting them. Estimates suggest 300 to 400 Periscope rifles were produced during the Gallipoli campaign. No precise records survived, and many weapons were lost or destroyed during the evacuation. The workshop prioritized quality over quantity. Each weapon was tested before issue to ensure proper mirror alignment and trigger function. After the Gallipoli evacuation in December 1915 and January 1916, the Periscope rifle concept didn't disappear. Australian forces carried the design knowledge to other theatres. Similar weapons appeared in Australian trenches on the Western Front, though the different tactical situation, longer ranges, more permanent fortifications, meant they saw less intensive use than at Gallipoli. The Periscope rifle principle influenced later weapon development. The concept of firing from concealment while using optical systems for aiming would eventually lead to periscope sights for tanks, remote weapon stations, and modern cornershot devices used by special forces. While none of these directly descended from Beech's design, they shared the fundamental insight that separation of the shooter from the point of aim provided tactical advantages. Today, surviving examples of Beech's Periscope rifle are extremely rare. The Australian War Memorial holds several examples in its collection, including one believed to be constructed by Beech himself. The Army Museum of South Australia displays a reproduction Periscope rifle as part of its Gallipoli exhibit. A few private collectors own authenticated examples, though verifying provenance is challenging given the improvised nature of their original construction. Modern military historians regard the Periscope rifle as a textbook example of battlefield innovation. It solved a specific tactical problem with available materials, achieved widespread adoption through proven effectiveness rather than official mandate, and saved lives in measurable ways. These characteristics make it a frequent case study in military staff colleges when teaching adaptive leadership and tactical problem solving. William Beech himself survived Gallipoli. He was promoted to sergeant in recognition of his invention and continued service with the 2nd Battalion. He later served on the Western Front, surviving the war and returning to Australia in 1919. He died in 1929 at age 54. His obituary in Melbourne's newspapers made only passing mention of his war service and no mention at all of the Periscope rifle, a reminder that even significant innovations can fade from public memory surprisingly quickly. The Periscope rifle occupies a unique place in military history, a weapon born of desperate necessity that actually worked. Modern military analysts studying the Gallipoli campaign consistently highlight the Periscope rifle as evidence that bottom-up innovation can outpace top-down procurement when battlefield conditions demand immediate solutions. Professor Ashley Ekins of the Australian War Memorial notes, "The Periscope rifle succeeded not because of superior engineering or advanced technology, but because it directly addressed a life-or-death problem that soldiers were facing every day. That kind of focused innovation is worth more than 1,000 committee meetings in London." The weapon influenced subsequent military thinking about trench warfare equipment. After Gallipoli, the British Army began systematically soliciting soldier feedback about equipment deficiencies and encouraging field modifications. The French developed similar programs. While formal military bureaucracies never became truly agile, the Periscope rifle demonstrated that fostering innovation at the unit level could yield significant tactical advantages. In modern times, the principle has reappeared in various forms. Israeli Defense Forces developed the cornershot system, a hinged pistol mount that allows soldiers to shoot around corners while remaining in cover. U.S. Special Operations units use remote weapon stations and periscope cameras. While technologically sophisticated, these systems share the fundamental concept Beech pioneered in 1915, separating the shooter from the weapon to reduce exposure. The Periscope rifle also holds symbolic significance in Australian military culture. It represents the resourcefulness, pragmatism, and ingenuity that Australians like to believe characterize their national approach to problems. Whether this self-image is fully accurate is debatable, but the Periscope rifle provides a concrete historical example that supports the narrative. For historians studying the First World War, the Periscope rifle offers a fascinating counterpoint to the standard narrative of generals stubbornly refusing to adapt to trench warfare. While high-level strategy often proved inflexible, soldiers in the trenches were constantly innovating, adapting, and developing practical solutions to tactical problems. The Periscope rifle is perhaps the most successful of these grassroots innovations, a weapon designed by a lance corporal that was adopted across an entire army. 6 feet of boxwood. 2 mirrors taken from broken periscopes. Copper wire from a field telephone. A Lee-Enfield rifle that had stormed ashore at ANZAC Cove. This was the weapon that let Australians shoot back from Quinn's Post when lifting your head meant death. This was the weapon that turned Turkish sniper supremacy into a level fight. This was the weapon that a builder's foreman invented because the British War Office had never imagined trenches where enemies threw grenades into your position from 8 meters away. The Turks had the high ground, the experience, and every tactical advantage. The British had the resources, the industrial capacity, and generations of military engineering expertise. But the Australians had William Beech. And at Gallipoli, where survival measured in seconds and distance in meters, that made all the difference.